we're in the gym like 10 hours a day. And that's kind of like a normal training day.
What is rhythmic gymnastics? Because I see this and it looks incredibly impressive, but I don't really know what's going on.
Rhythmic gymnastics, if I were to explain it, is a combination of artistry and coordination and dance. And there are 4 different apparatuses that you are required to compete with. And those are hoop, ball, clubs, and ribbon.
So how does it different than the kind of the gymnastics when I first think of the Olympics or gymnastics? Like, how does it differ from that? Okay, so you need this skill set for that gymnastics. You need this skill set for rhythmic gymnastics.
There are quite a few differences. I guess visually speaking, rhythmic gymnastics appears to look a little more like dance. I think artistry is a big component of the routines. There is an artistry component actually in the score. I think in rhythmic gymnastics, it's a lot more about kind of the gracefulness. You can have a strong routine, but you are not supposed to be flipping at all. There are rules against that, actually. You are kind of judged on criteria of different body elements as well. We have jumps, balances, and turns for your body difficulty. And then you also have the apparatus component, which you're handling with throwing it, you're rolling it if it's the ball, you're flipping it if it's the clubs, you're doing spirals. There are different, I guess, parameters surrounding each apparatus.
Do most people start out specifically in rhythmic gymnastics, or do they start in artistic gymnastics? Like,
Yeah, not necessarily. I know people who started in artistic and then pivoted because rhythmic seemed like more of a fit for them. I know people who started directly into rhythmic gymnastics if they knew that it existed. For me, I started because my parents saw an ad in a newspaper and they just kind of brought us there and we liked it. I never did artistic gymnastics in my entire life. Rhythmic is, I think, a bit smaller in the US. Yeah, it's a bit less known of a discipline.
yeah, in the United States, I would say it is. Would you say that that's the case in other countries, though?
Definitely not. It's more popular in certain countries. In Europe, it's probably a lot more popular than it is in the US.
Does that does that bother you? Does that create kind of an image around it or anything like that? Or
I think when I was younger, it definitely bothered me, but I also think that as a sport, we've grown, and I'm actually having a lot of fun with that now, realizing that it's great to be able to show something new to people who haven't seen something before. And I think there's a greater recognition in almost the legitimacy of what we do. I think people interpret that it's quite an easy sport, that some people said it wasn't a sport, that it's too much like dance. But I think the constant exposure of it through things like social media and just like greater, I guess, awareness of it helps people realize that it's actually a very difficult sport because it requires a lot of different elements and you have to make it all look very easy and fluid and continuous.
that's something that, like, from a personal perspective, like when I saw the sport when I was younger, I'll be real direct. I was like, "What is this? Like, what is this?" And then as I got older and saw it some more and realized what people were doing, that looks incredibly difficult. Like the timing of things and stuff like that. Do you think that people understand that part of it?
I don't think as many people understand it to the degree. I think acceptance of the sport and understanding is obviously growing. I think that has improved. But I also I also know people who still don't consider it as much of a sport as some other sports.
So, kind of backtracking a little bit, you got into it from an ad on the newspaper?
Yes, this was a long time ago.
Couple of weeks. We'll give you a couple of weeks,
Back
right?
when newspapers were still a thing.
How, well, then what made you stick with it? What did you like about it?
So when I was a kid, I did a lot of different things. A lot of them related to the arts, and I think the sport really pulled me in because it combined everything I loved about the various art forms I was doing. I played piano, and because you're doing a routine to a piece of music, you have to have pretty strong connection to your music and understanding of the music, and that's what I loved about it. I also did acting, and so the drama of your expression and the emotions you're able to kind of put forward in a routine really stuck with me too. And then I did dance, and it just all kind of fell together. And then there's the competition element of it. It's a sport, and I love being an athlete, and I think it was just something that felt really right.
What makes you good at it?
I think I have a very personal tie to my sport. And I think I have very personal feelings towards it. And through that, I think comes great passion and great dedication and perseverance to stick with it, I think. I also, like many people who excel in the sport, am willing to do whatever it takes. I'm willing to spend the long hours in the gym, not lose sight of my goals, and just work really, really hard every day, because it is something that your dedication can waver, because we train 6 days a week. We're in the gym like 10 hours a day. And that's kind of like a normal training day. And I remember when I was preparing for world championships, we had these crazy long days where they just like didn't seem like they would end. And it's very taxing mentally and just physically.
Why does it require that much training? Like 60 hours a week, like dang.
It's a lot.
What
Yeah,
is it
people are
about
always
it though that
surprised
require?
by how many hours we train. I think because it is such a diverse sport in terms of what you need. You need the apparatus coordination, and that takes so much precision. It also takes a lot of smart repetition, to be able to get your throws that precise, and also just to get the foundation of apparatus work. And then there's 4 apparatus. There you have to master all 4 of them to be a competitive rhythmic gymnast. And then there's your body. You have to, from a young age, you're training everything from strength to flexibility. And then there's an element of like artistry. And then you have your routines. And you put that all together, and it's 90 seconds. But it's 90 seconds that are jam-packed from beginning to end. And every single little detail, every single step matters. So that like refining process takes a lot of time.
You mentioned a personal connection. Like what's for you is so personal about it?
So my personal journey in the sport has kind of been all over the place. I started very young, as many do. I started when I was 5, 6, and that journey took me from Minnesota, where I grew up, to New York, where I currently still train. And I've been an 11-time national team member, which is a lot of years, but I had a 5-year retirement in the middle. So I actually retired from the sport competitively in 2017 and didn't return to competition until 2022. And I think I just had a lot of like pent up sadness, like burnt out a little bit, anger, all of it when I finished the first time, just because you put so much into it, you put so much of yourself into it. And when I came back, it just requires me to have a very personal reason for coming back. And I think that's where my perseverance comes from now, is that in its essence, I'm doing it for myself and for the reasons that I've established for myself. And it's a very personal journey.
So if we can, let's run through some of the different events. There's 4 events, correctly?
Yes.
So like when we talk about the hoop, like what's you're trying to do what's the difficulty, that kind of stuff.
I think this actually applies to every single apparatus. You have a set of body difficulty that you must fulfill. And you'll see that is in 3 categories: jumps, turns, and balances. Every routine has those. You can use the same ones in each routine. Hoop specific things would include rolls. So you'll see the rolls across the body, rolls on the floor. You obviously do not want the hoop to roll away from you. And high throws. So high throws are called risks, which I think is funny because they're risky. And in every apparatus, there will be apparatus difficulties.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Let's watch this a little bit,
I can
please.
go through and tell you what each thing is. So this is this is a turn. This is part of a body difficulty. And then this will be a jump, which is another body difficulty. Each one is worth a different amount of points. And those are kind of connector steps into another turn. And in these set of rules, you had to have dancing steps, which actually are still a thing in the last set of rules that I did. But the dancing step, we don't have to go into the nitty gritty of it. So a dancing step has to fulfill certain criteria, a balance. And now this is a risk. So there would be a high toss with a number of different rotations underneath into a catch.
That's incredible to me. I don't even understand how you do that. Like, throw that up with your foot. How high do you throw that up in the air? Like, how high is that in the air?
I couldn't give you an exact measure, but we often have a hard time finding training facilities because the ceilings are too low. So that is a struggle for athletes in the US. A lot of them do not have stable training facilities with proper ceiling and enough space because the carpet is massive and the ceilings have to be very tall. And it is better if you're able to throw higher.
That was high enough that it was in the air for 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So, like, how long does it take before, how many times do you practice something like that before you can do it?
Oh, so many times. Yeah, a repetition, like I said, is a big part of our sport. Smart repetition is a really big part of our sport because if you over repeat, you can get injured very easily. And I learned that the hard way.
Okay, so after the hoop, there is the...
Then you have the ball. So the ball is not a bowling ball. That is something I get asked way more than I'd like to admit. The ball is quite similar to the hoop because you can also roll it. So rolls are a big part of ball as well. And you'll see that where the rolls usually have to go across 2 large body parts. So that can be 2 arms, your trunk and your legs, 1 leg, the other leg, any sort of formation of 2 large body parts. And I think visually it looks a little softer. I don't know how else to explain it. It just is a little like smoother.
Okay, so let's watch this.
Yeah, and the cool thing about the sport is you can be very creative. And creativity is really fun to watch.
That
specific thing I train, I can remember how many times I trained that. And honestly, there are people who do that from a huge, large toss now, which I didn't need with these rules. But people do that catch with many rotations under the toss too, which is very impressive. I will be completely honest, I do not remember if this routine was good or not.
I mean, it's really impressive to me.
Thank you. So that is what's called an apparatus difficulty with a roll.
Are there required things like you have to do this so many times, you have to do that so many times?
You have to have, in this set of rules, 20 apparatus difficulties. I'm like watching this and I see so many mistakes.
But to me, like watching it, like what are you noticing that like, oh, that was a mistake, that was a mistake? Because to me, this all looks like, okay, great.
Yeah, so I'm very good at this. I'm very picky. So that would be an execution deduction for shape and for a large step underneath. I'm like exposing myself. There was a hop. See, like it was a small minuscule hop, but the rest of that element could be not counted. So there's just like execution deductions on that.
But not the kind of thing that any casual person would notice.
No, this would all be things that a viewer who knew the rhythmic rules would really be able to tell, I think. Even watching this routine, I'm getting stressed.
But did you catch that with your legs? You did?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So when you do that, right, like when you make one of the throws, are you throwing it to a specific spot? Like, is it just perfectly timed, or are you making adjustments all over the place to make that happen?
I think when you do a toss, how I approach it is I try to remember the sensation of when I'm throwing it to the correct spot, coupled with kind of my baseline technique, making sure my arms are, for example, for that toss, my arms are extended, that I'm square, like my shoulders are square with my hips, because common mistakes, like if you're off by a degree or two, the toss will not go the direction you want. It's also important that the toss is forward of you, because you can get a deduction for trajectory if it's not precise in front of you. You can also get deduction for you can also not get credit for the big toss if you don't fulfill your rotations underneath. So these are all very specific things. And because of that, yes, in long story short, I do direct my throws to a very specific area of the carpet.
So you're trying to throw it up to have it land on this spot, as opposed to like, I'm going to throw it up and then I'm going to do what I'm going to do and adjust to where the ball is.
I think you have to be flexible. So what makes a lot of athletes in the sport stand out is their ability to adjust. So you cannot be perfect. Tosses will go far or they'll be too short. And you'll see very incredible saves from great gymnasts because they're able to adapt quickly underneath the throw. They're able to adjust their bodies. That's how you can tell someone is, one, a great competitor, and two, very seasoned, is because they're able to adapt their body to how far the toss is. Yeah, a lot of elements can affect it. But the ribbon, when the AC is on, can go every which direction. We actually, we do consistency, I guess, drills, consistency markings for ourselves during training. Like, I will practice each risk, each throw multiple times, every practice of every single apparatus, because you do need them to be that precise.
Now, okay, when we talk about these clubs, like the first thing that I'm thinking about is like bowling pins.
Yep. They do look a little like bowling pins.
They do look like bowling pins, but how big are they? Like, how big, how heavy in real life?
It's funny because I'm watching these videos and I'm just like cringing a little.
But I feel like
this was my second year back from competing, and there were a lot of things I had to figure out, like what worked for me and what didn't. So some of these elements in my routine I don't have anymore because they just didn't work for me.
So, for example, like, okay, the person who wins the world championship or wins the gold medal in this competition, like, just from my perspective, like, what are they doing that you would not be doing?
At least from my experience back in the day, when we would train with these girls, and this sport would be like their entire life. And it's very different in some of these countries where they are able to make training their priority, whereas I wasn't able to do that. I had to go to school. Athletes in the US don't get paid enough to live off of.
Yeah.
Just speaking. So yeah, I have a day job. I train at nights. And I think that's kind of like the biggest thing.
All right, last one, the ribbons. This is the one that I notice the most. That's the one I feel like I usually see.
This is the most identifiable out of all of them. That's why whenever I explain rhythmic gymnastics, usually the first thing I say will be, it's with the ribbon.
So what's the goal? Like, you're trying to just constantly keep it moving the whole time?
Yes. So part of the technique in ribbon is keeping it moving and making sure your patterns are precise. So if you're making these little loops called spirals, they really are looking for how clean and how tight and how many spirals are happening. And if you're making a snake, which looks like the zigzag, it's the same thing. So they're evaluating kind of based off of how your ribbon is moving as well.
Do you have to have a different outfit for every single one? Like, is it hard to find an outfit that matches the ribbon?
So we get these custom made. Most people, I think, at an elite high level will go to a designer who is designing specifically rhythmic leotards.
Are you ready for some harder / listener submitted questions?
Sure.
Your favorite event, your least favorite event?
Favorite event, I think you can tell by the routines, honestly. Favorite event, ribbon. Least favorite event, it's a toss-up between hoop and clubs. And I know some gymnasts are like, my favorite is whichever one is working. I love ribbon even when it's not working, which to some people, like people in the sport, it's kind of a hot take. I think a lot of people like hoop, and I really do not enjoy working with the hoop or clubs.
But is it more unique to each person? Like, if I ask 10 different rhythmic gymnastics, they're all going to have a different answer. Like, no, most people really don't like that one.
I wonder. I think it's just more of like a trend I've noticed where people do not like ribbon. because ribbon's very fickle. And if it's too hot outside, it gets like very sticky. If it's air conditioning, if there's any sort of breeze, it really affects, like, I think you can feel it the most with the ribbon. Yeah, I don't know. I posted a video on my social media about like my favorite and my not favorite. And in the comments, people were like, how do you not like hoop? Like so many people asked. So I think, yeah, I think it's maybe a little bit biased.
Hardest event, easiest event.
On a judging difficulty level, hoop tends to be the highest difficulty on paper. Like you typically you'll see the highest hoop score is higher than the highest ribbon score. I think it really depends on what your skill set is, what the actual hardest event is. My hoop routine this year was my most difficult routine, but I think for me, the most difficult routine to master is clubs.
Can people be good at one and not the other? Like, have you ever seen some people who are like, I'm fantastic at this and I stink at the other ones?
Yeah, I've seen that. I see that in myself. I think I'm definitely more skilled with ribbon than I am with clubs. But with this sport, you kind of have to become a master of all four if you really want to be competitive, because very rarely will you have a competition where you have to be like an apparatus specialty.
Ooh. How do artistic gymnasts feel about rhythmic gymnasts? Is there a rivalry there?
I don't think there's a rivalry at all. If anything, we do not cross paths enough. And I say this because I would love to meet the artistic gymnasts. Like, I'm such a huge fan of them. I know rhythmic gymnasts don't feel any sort of like competition with them because they're basically separate sports, more of like an admiration, and we draw a lot of inspiration from them.
Area in the United States where it's biggest, where in the world is it biggest?
Generally speaking, Europe/Asia. Right now, the top girls basically almost all come from Europe. Europe and Asia. I think you never know what's going to happen in the Olympics, but the front runners based off of scoring from this year are from Bulgaria, Germany, and Italy. China has very good gymnasts as well, particularly the group. Within the US, California has a lot of rhythmic gymnasts. They have a lot of gyms there, a lot of different teams. Yeah, I think I would, if I had to place money on it, I'd say them.
California. That's pretty much all the questions we got. Is there anything that you think that we missed?
I know we touched upon the leotards and the music selection. Oh, I think the music selection is another thing that's a big thing in rhythmic.
Yeah, why is the music so important?
I think some gymnasts oftentimes select music that they want to tell a story to, like I said. And I think that is a portion of the sport that's just really interesting. For example, my programs this year, one music was written specifically for me, and the other one was arranged specifically for my routine. And the other two, one is kind of a montage to my Chinese heritage and background. And so I think the choice of routine and the pairing of the leotard really just sells a story. I think a lot of rhythmic gymnasts, that's like a huge part of the sport and where a lot of appreciation for it comes from.